Haunted by vivid dreams of a man from the past who always met a tragic end, I discovered his identity. Alistair, who died in 1888. An inexplicable force pulled me back in time, to Victorian London, with a desperate mission. To save the soul I recognized from my dreams. But amidst the smoky streets and societal constraints, as I fought to rewrite his destiny, I found myself falling for the very man I was trying to rescue. Once Upon a Cozy Night welcomes you to a world of mystery, magic, and just the right amount of drama. So snuggle up, get comfy, and if you love a good story, don't forget to subscribe, because this next tale? Oh, it's one for the books. Yukio traced her fingers over the aged, silver locket nestled in the palm of her hand. It felt cool against her skin, a tangible link to a past shrouded in whispers and family lore. Now this, she murmured, her eyes gleaming with a familiar spark of anticipation. This is a story our family has kept close for generations. A story of love that defied time itself. She carefully opened the worn leather-bound journal that lay beside her. Its pages, yellowed with age, held the handwritten account passed down through her ancestors. The scent of aged ink filled her senses as she began to read, the modern world around her fading away, replaced by the extraordinary tale of her ancestor. Let's begin. The dream started subtly, like whispers in the dead of night. Faint images of cobbled streets slick with rain, the distant clatter of hooves, and the melancholic glow of gaslight filtering through a perpetual fog. But they grew in intensity, morphing into vivid, almost tangible experiences. I was no longer just an observer. I was there, a silent phantom moving through a world that felt both alien and strangely familiar. And then there was him. His face was the anchor of these nocturnal voyages. A strong jawline softened by a kind smile, eyes that held a depth of understanding that resonated deep within me, even though I'd never seen them in the waking world. His laughter, a warm resonant sound, would echo in my ears long after I'd stirred from sleep. We would walk through bustling marketplaces, his hand brushing mine, a spark igniting with the briefest of contact. We'd talk for hours, sharing thoughts and dreams in hushed tones in dimly lit parlors, a connection forming that felt more real than anything in my own life. But each dream, no matter how idyllic, always ended the same way, with a sudden brutal interruption. A chaotic scene at a waterfront, the screech of gulls turning into cries of alarm, a sickening thud, and then, nothing. A void where his presence had been. I would wake up gasping, my heart pounding, the phantom ache of his loss a tangible weight in my chest. Another one? My best friend Chloe would ask, her brow furrowed with concern as she watched me down my third cup of coffee before noon. You look like you haven't slept in weeks. It's him, Chloe, I'd say, my voice barely a whisper. The man from my dreams. It was so real this time. We were talking about the stars, I think. And then, I'd trail off, the familiar knot of grief tightening in my throat. Myra, honey, dreams are just that. Dreams. Maybe you're just stressed. Work has been crazy, right? Chloe would try to reason, but her words felt hollow against the vivid reality of my nighttime encounters. But it wasn't just the emotional impact. The details were becoming too specific. The cut of his coat, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, the cadence of his speech. It all felt meticulously real. One night, I dreamt he showed me a small, silver locket, intricately engraved with a single initial. He told me it was a gift from his mother. Driven by an inexplicable need to understand, I started researching. Late nights were spent poring over historical archives online, searching for any mention of the places and events I'd witnessed in my sleep. It felt like chasing shadows, a desperate attempt to find substance in the ethereal. Then, one rainy afternoon, while browsing through an online collection of historical photographs of London, my breath hitched. There he was. The same kind eyes, the same gentle smile that haunted my nights. The caption beneath the photograph read, Mr. Alistair Finch, esteemed architect, tragically deceased in an accident at the East London Docks, 1888. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The ache in my chest finally had a name, a face, a history. This wasn't just a dream, it was a connection, a bridge across time to a man who had lived and died over a century ago. A wave of grief washed over me, profound and inexplicable for someone I had never truly known. But beneath the sorrow, a flicker of something else ignited, a desperate, illogical hope. If I could dream of him, if I could feel this connection, wasn't it possible? Wasn't it just possible that I could somehow reach him? Save him? The thought was audacious, bordering on insane, but it took root in my heart and refused to be dislodged. My dreams had become a mission. The discovery of Alistair's photograph became an obsession. I devoured every piece of information I could find about him. His family, his work, the details surrounding his death. The official record stated it was a tragic accident. A scaffolding collapse at the docks during the construction of a new warehouse. The date was clearly marked. October 27, 1888. The date echoed in my mind. A looming deadline. I felt an urgency I couldn't explain, a frantic need to somehow intervene, to prevent the tragedy I had witnessed so vividly in my dreams. But how? The chasm of time felt insurmountable. One afternoon, while rummaging through a box of family heirlooms, my fingers brushed against a heavy ornate locket. It was made of tarnished silver, intricately engraved with swirling patterns. I vaguely remembered my grandmother telling me it had been passed down through generations. As I held it, a strange sense of familiarity washed over me. It felt warm. Later that evening, as I sat staring at Alistair's photograph, the locket in my other hand, a faint hum resonated through the metal. I frowned, holding it closer to my ear. The humming intensified, a subtle vibration against my skin. It was the same locket I had seen in my dream, the one Alistair had said was a gift from his mother. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. Over the next few days, I experimented. Whenever I held the locket while looking at Alistair's photograph, the humming would return, growing stronger the more intensely I focused on his image. It felt like a pull, a subtle magnetic force drawing the past and the present together. "You're spending way too much time with those old pictures," Chloe commented one evening, finding me surrounded by books and printouts, the locket resting on the photograph. "It's starting to feel a little morbid, Myra." I think this locket has something to do with it," I said, holding it out to her. "Feel this." Chloe took the locket, her expression skeptical. "Feel what?" "It's just an old piece of jewelry." But as I placed the locket back on Alistair's picture, the faint hum started again. Chloe's eyes widened. "Did you hear that?" "What was that?" "It only happens when it's near his picture," I explained, my voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and a growing sense of wonder. "I don't understand it, but I think it's some kind of connection." The idea was ludicrous, straight out of a science fiction novel. But the feeling was undeniable. The locket, Alistair's photograph, my recurring dreams. They were all pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet comprehend. Then came the storm. It raged through the city, the wind howling like a banshee, rain lashing against the windows. I sat in my living room, the locket clutched tightly in my hand, staring at Alistair's photograph. The humming of the locket intensified, vibrating so strongly it felt like it might leap from my grasp. The lights flickered violently, and then, with a deafening crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building, the locket flared with an intense, blinding light. I cried out, shielding my eyes. The world around me dissolved into a swirling vortex of light and sound. The familiar comfort of my apartment vanished, replaced by a dizzying sensation of being pulled, stretched, and turned inside out. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I stumbled, disoriented, my limbs heavy and uncoordinated. The air was thick with the smell of coal smoke and something else. Something earthy and organic. The sounds were different too. The rhythmic clatter of hooves on cobblestone, the distant cries of street vendors, the unfamiliar accents of voices passing by. I blinked, trying to focus my blurry vision. The street was narrow and crowded, lined with buildings that seemed to lean precariously over the thoroughfare. Gas lamps flickered, casting an eerie glow on the wet pavement. Horse-drawn carriages rumbled past, their wheels splashing muddy water. The people around me were dressed in long skirts, frock coats, and top hats. Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't my city. This wasn't my time. I looked down at my own clothes, jeans and a t-shirt, feeling utterly out of place amidst the Victorian attire. The locket lay cool against my palm. It had brought me here. To 1888 London. To Alistair's time. The impossible had happened. Now, the terrifying reality of my situation sank in. I was lost, alone, and utterly unprepared for the world I had somehow stumbled into. But one thought cut through the fear. I was here. I had a chance. I had to find him. I had to save Alistair. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard reality. I was utterly alone in a world I only knew from books and dreams. My modern clothes were attracting stares, a stark contrast to the long skirts and tailored suits surrounding me. Every word I spoke felt foreign, my American accent undoubtedly marking me as an outsider. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, and the damp chill of the London air seeped into my bones. My first priority was to find somewhere safe, even for a few hours. I ducked into a narrow alleyway, trying to gather my thoughts. What would Chloe do? Practical, resourceful Chloe would find information. Taking a deep breath, I decided to try the same. Emerging cautiously back onto the bustling street, I approached a newsstand, the headlines emblazoned with unfamiliar names and events. The news vendor, a gruff-looking man with a thick mustache, eyed me suspiciously. "Excuse me," I began hesitantly, trying to adopt a more formal tone. "Could you perhaps direct me to a lodging house? A respectable one, if you please." He grunted, his gaze sweeping over my attire again. "Lodging house, eh? You look a bit out of place, miss. New to the city?" "Yes," I replied, trying to sound demure. "I've just arrived." He pointed a thick finger down the street. "Try Mrs. Higgins' place, a few streets over. Tell her Silas sent you. Though I can't vouch for the company you'll find there." "Thank you," I said, offering a tentative smile. Clutching the few crumpled bills I had in my pocket, a pathetic sum in this era, I was sure. I followed his directions. Mrs. Higgins' lodging house was a dimly lit, slightly musty establishment. The landlady, a stout woman with a severe expression, scrutinized me with unconcealed suspicion. "Well?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Silas sent you, did he? You'll need to pay in advance, miss. And no gentleman callers after 10. "Of course," I agreed quickly, relieved to have found a temporary haven. The small, sparsely furnished room was hardly luxurious, but it offered a semblance of privacy. Over the next few days, I tried to blend in, observing the customs and mannerisms of the people around me. My lack of knowledge about even the simplest things was a constant source of anxiety. I needed help, but who could I trust? Telling anyone the truth about my origins would surely lead to ridicule or worse, being locked away. One afternoon, while browsing the dusty shelves of a second-hand bookshop, I overheard a conversation that caught my attention. Two men were discussing recent scientific advancements, their language more akin to what I was used to. "The theories of thermodynamics are truly revolutionary. Wouldn't you agree, Ashton?" one of them said. "Indeed, Mr. Davies," the other replied, his tone thoughtful. "Though some of the more unconventional ideas being floated are rather difficult to accept." Seizing the opportunity, I approached them hesitantly. "Excuse me, gentlemen," I began. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. You mentioned thermodynamics." The man called Ashton, a gentleman with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, turned to me with a polite but curious expression. "Indeed, madam. Are you also interested in such matters?" I have some knowledge of them," I replied carefully. "And I was wondering if you might know of a physician in the city? Someone open-minded?" Dr. Ashton's brow furrowed slightly. "I am a physician, madam. Though I'm not sure what you mean by open-minded." Taking a leap of faith, I decided to be as vague but suggestive as possible. Someone who considers possibilities beyond the conventional understanding of things. Someone who might be interested in unusual cases. Dr. Ashton studied me for a moment, his gaze assessing. "My consulting rooms are on Harley Street. If you wish to discuss a medical matter, you are welcome to call upon me." It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. A physician might at least be more receptive to the idea of something extraordinary. Perhaps he could even offer some practical help navigating this bewildering era. Dr. Ashton's consulting rooms were surprisingly modern, a stark contrast to the gaslit streets outside. He listened patiently as I recounted a carefully crafted, albeit highly embellished version of my story. I spoke of vivid dreams, a strange locket, and a disorienting experience that had left me feeling lost and out of sync with my surroundings. I avoided any direct mention of time travel, framing it instead as a form of amnesia and disorientation following a peculiar incident. "So, you have no memory of how you arrived in London?" Dr. Ashton inquired, his gaze sharp but not unkind. "None, sir," I replied, trying to sound distressed. One moment I was elsewhere, and the next I was here. Everything feels unfamiliar, yet somehow I have these vivid dreams of a life I haven't lived. He steepled his fingers, his expression thoughtful. And these dreams, they are of a specific time period? Yes, I confirmed. The late 1880s. The details are incredibly clear. Dr. Ashton remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on me. I could see the skepticism in his gaze, but also a flicker of something else. Perhaps curiosity, or a physician's inherent interest in the unusual. Miss? He prompted, realizing he didn't know my name. Sterling, I supplied quickly. Myra Sterling. Miss Sterling, he continued. Your case is unusual to say the least. While I cannot offer a definitive medical explanation for your experiences, I am intrigued by the details you have provided. The human mind is a complex instrument, and the power of suggestion and memory can be quite profound. He didn't believe me, not really. But he wasn't dismissing me outright either. It was a start. Is there anything at all you recall that might help us understand your situation? He asked. Only the dreams, I reiterated. And a name. Alistair Finch. He features prominently in my dreams. I feel a strong connection to him. Dr. Ashton's eyebrows rose slightly. Alistair Finch? The architect. You know him? I asked, my heart leaping with a sudden surge of hope. I have met Mr. Finch on a few occasions through mutual acquaintances, Dr. Ashton replied. A respected member of society. He is currently involved in the construction of a new warehouse at the East London docks. The docks. The very place where my dreams had shown Alistair's tragic end. A chill ran down my spine. Do you know him well? I pressed. Could you perhaps introduce me? Dr. Ashton hesitated. Miss Sterling, with all due respect, you appear to be in a delicate state. I'm not sure if forming an acquaintance with a complete stranger, based solely on your dreams, is advisable. But if he's real, I argued, my voice trembling slightly. If the details in my dreams are accurate, perhaps he can help me understand what's happening to me. Perhaps he's the key to unlocking my lost memories. Dr. Ashton considered my plea, his gaze softening slightly. Very well, Miss Sterling. I occasionally attend social gatherings at the Blackwood estate. Mr. Finch is a frequent guest there. If you are amenable, I could potentially arrange for you to be present at the next gathering. You could be introduced as a new acquaintance of mine, perhaps interested in the local architecture. A wave of relief washed over me. This was it. My chance. Oh, Dr. Ashton, I would be eternally grateful. However, he cautioned, his tone firm, you must promise me that you will be discreet. Do not speak of these dreams to Mr. Finch or anyone else. For now, we will simply observe. Understand. Perfectly, I agreed, my mind already racing. I was going to meet Alistair. I was finally going to see the man from my dreams in the flesh. And then, I would find a way to save him. The thought filled me with a mixture of excitement and a terrifying sense of responsibility. My journey had just begun. The Blackwood estate was a sprawling mansion surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens, a world away from the cramped lodging house I now called home. Dr. Ashton had provided me with a somewhat more appropriate, if slightly dated dress, explaining that it had belonged to a distant relative and might help me blend in. I felt a pang of unease as I looked at my reflection. A stranger in borrowed clothes, about to infiltrate a world that wasn't mine. The gathering was a lively affair, filled with the polite chatter and hushed laughter of Victorian society. Dr. Ashton guided me through the crowded drawing room, introducing me to various acquaintances, each greeting me with a mixture of polite curiosity and subtle scrutiny. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scanned the room, searching for the familiar face from my dreams. And then I saw him. He was standing near a window, engaged in conversation with a distinguished-looking older gentleman and a graceful woman with auburn hair. Even from across the room, there was an undeniable presence about him. The same thoughtful gaze, the same easy confidence I had witnessed in my dreams. It was Alistair. Dr. Ashton led me towards their group. Mr. Finch, he said, his voice cutting gently through the murmur of conversation, allow me to introduce Miss Myra Sterling. Miss Sterling has a keen interest in architecture and has recently arrived in London. Alistair turned, his eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of something. Recognition? Or perhaps just polite interest in his expression as he offered a courteous bow. Miss Sterling, a pleasure. I am Alistair Finch. His voice was even more resonant than I remembered, sending a shiver down my spine. The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Finch, I managed to say, my voice betraying a slight tremor. The auburn-haired woman, whom Dr. Ashton introduced as Miss Eleanor Ainsworth, Alistair's dear friend, regarded me with a warm smile. Welcome to London, Miss Sterling. I hope you find our city to your liking. Thank you, Miss Ainsworth, I replied, feeling a wave of relief at her genuine kindness. Over the next hour, I found myself drawn into conversation with Alistair. He spoke passionately about his work, describing the intricate details of his architectural designs with an enthusiasm that was infectious. He asked me about my impressions of London, and I found myself carefully choosing my words, trying to sound knowledgeable without revealing my anachronistic perspective. So, Miss Sterling, Alistair said, his gaze direct. Dr. Ashton mentioned your interest in architecture. What are your thoughts on the emerging steel frame constructions? My mind raced. Steel frame. That was still relatively new in this era. I find them remarkably innovative, I replied, trying to sound suitably impressed without giving away my 21st century understanding of their widespread use. The potential for creating taller, more expansive structures seems quite significant. Alistair's eyes lit up. Indeed. It is a fascinating time for our profession. Many still cling to traditional methods, but I believe steel offers a glimpse into the future of building. We spoke for what felt like a long time, discussing everything from the city's burgeoning infrastructure to the aesthetic merits of different architectural styles. I found myself genuinely enjoying his company, his intelligence and passion shining through in every word. He was even more captivating in person than in my dreams. As the evening drew to a close, Alistair approached me as I was saying goodbye to Dr. Ashton. Miss Sterling, he said, his smile warm, I found our conversation most stimulating. Perhaps you would permit me to show you some of the city's architectural highlights in the coming days? I would be happy to offer my perspective. My heart skipped a beat. This was my chance. I would be delighted, Mr. Finch, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. Excellent, he said. Perhaps we could meet in the gardens of Kensington Palace on Tuesday afternoon? Tuesday would be perfect, I confirmed, a sense of exhilaration bubbling within me. My mission to save Alistair had taken its first crucial step. The gardens of Kensington Palace were a riot of color and life on Tuesday afternoon. Alistair greeted me with a courteous smile, and we began to stroll along the winding paths, the gentle murmur of conversation and the chirping of birds creating a peaceful atmosphere. I was particularly intrigued by your comments on steel frame construction the other evening, Miss Sterling, Alistair began, his tone thoughtful. You seem to possess a rather forward-thinking perspective. I have always been fascinated by innovation, Mr. Finch, I replied carefully. And it seems to me that progress often lies in embracing new materials and techniques. As we walked, I steered the conversation towards his current project at the East London docks. Dr. Ashton mentioned you are overseeing the construction of a new warehouse there, I said, trying to sound casually interested. It must be a significant undertaking. Indeed it is, Alistair replied, a hint of pride in his voice. A large-scale project with its own unique challenges. The pace is demanding, and one must always be vigilant about safety. Safety is paramount, of course. I agreed, my heart beginning to pound. This was my opening. Especially with such large structures. One hears of accidents occurring from time to time. Alistair nodded somberly. Regrettably, that is the nature of such endeavors. But we have taken every precaution. Our foreman is experienced, and we adhere to the strictest safety regulations. I hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject of my premonition, without sounding completely unhinged. Mr. Finch, I began, my voice a little unsteady. I have a rather unusual disposition. Sometimes I experience vivid feelings about things. Almost like premonitions. Alistair regarded me with a curious but not dismissive expression. Premonitions, Miss Sterling? That is intriguing. Taking a deep breath, I continued. I have had a recurring feeling, a sense of unease, regarding your work at the docks. A feeling that something untoward might happen. I watched his face carefully, searching for any sign of disbelief or ridicule. He remained silent for a moment, his brow furrowed slightly. Untoward? In what manner? I can't say precisely, I admitted, trying to sound genuinely concerned rather than prophetic. Just a sense of danger. Perhaps involving the scaffolding? Or a fall. The words felt clumsy and inadequate, but I had to try. Alistair's expression turned more serious. Miss Sterling, while I appreciate your concern, I assure you that we take safety very seriously. The scaffolding is regularly inspected, and all workers are instructed on proper procedures. Of course, I said quickly. I don't doubt your diligence. It's just, this feeling is very strong. Perhaps you could be extra cautious in the coming weeks? Especially around the scaffolding? He studied me intently, his gaze searching. You seem genuinely troubled by this, Miss Sterling. I am, I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. I wouldn't want to see anyone come to harm. Alistair sighed softly. I understand your concern, and I appreciate you sharing your feelings with me. While I am a man of science and reason, I am not one to dismiss the possibility of things unseen. I will certainly ensure that all safety measures are rigorously followed at the docks. It wasn't the outright belief I had hoped for, but it was a start. He hadn't dismissed me entirely. As we continued our walk, I tried to subtly glean more information about the timeline of the construction, trying to pinpoint the exact date of the predicted accident. Alistair spoke of the project's progress, mentioning that the warehouse was nearing completion and the scaffolding would likely be dismantled within a few weeks. The final stages can often be the most perilous, I interjected, trying to emphasize the urgency. Perhaps you could avoid being on site during the dismantling process? Alistair chuckled softly. As the architect, Miss Sterling, I am afraid my presence will be required to oversee the final stages. But I assure you, I will be extra vigilant, as you so earnestly advise. I knew I had to find a way to be more direct, to convey the absolute certainty of the danger I felt. But how could I do that without revealing the impossible truth of my origins? The weight of his impending fate pressed down on me, a heavy burden in the otherwise beautiful afternoon. Despite Alistair's polite skepticism regarding my premonitions, our encounters continued with a warmth and ease that surprised me. We met frequently in the following weeks, for walks in the parks, visits to museums, and even a few rather daring for the time, excursions to burgeoning art galleries. Each interaction deepened the connection I felt with him, solidifying the realization that my feelings were no longer just a consequence of vivid dreams. I was falling in love with Alistair Finch, the man from the past. He, in turn, seemed increasingly intrigued by me. He often remarked on my unusual perspectives, my knowledge of subjects that seemed beyond my supposed experience, and my unwavering conviction about the dangers at the docks. While he never explicitly stated he believed my warnings, I noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor. He became more meticulous about safety procedures at the construction site, often mentioning the extra precautions he was taking, just to be sure. One crisp autumn evening, we found ourselves strolling through Regent's Park as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of orange and gold. The air was filled with the scent of fallen leaves, and a comfortable silence settled between us. Miss Sterling, Alistair began, his voice softer than usual, you have a remarkable way of seeing the world. Your insights, though unconventional, often give me pause for thought. Thank you, Mr. Finch, I replied, my heart fluttering at his words. You speak of progress and innovation with such certainty, he continued, turning to face me. It is as if you have witnessed the future. I held my breath, my mind racing. How much could I reveal without sounding completely mad? Perhaps I have a strong imagination, I offered cautiously. Or perhaps, some things are simply destined to be. He studied my face intently, his gaze searching. And what, in your estimation, is destined to be, Miss Sterling? Our eyes met, and in that moment, the unspoken feelings between us hung heavy in the air. I believe that some connections transcend time, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Alistair's expression softened. He reached out, his gloved hand gently taking mine. His touch sent a jolt of warmth through me, a tangible link across the years that separated us. Miss Sterling. Myra, he said, using my given name for the first time, a thrill coursing through me at the sound of it on his lips. I find myself increasingly drawn to your company. Your perspectives are refreshing, and your spirit captivating. Just as he seemed about to say more, a familiar figure approached us. Miss Eleanor Ainsworth. Her smile was polite, but there was a hint of something guarded in her eyes as she greeted us. Alistair, there you are, she said, her gaze lingering on our joined hands before quickly looking away. I was beginning to think you had eloped with the autumn leaves. She turned to me. Miss Sterling, it's a pleasure to see you again. Miss Ainsworth, I replied, offering a polite nod. Eleanor's presence seemed to shift the atmosphere, a subtle reminder of the social constraints of the era. Alistair withdrew his hand, though his gaze remained fixed on mine for a fleeting moment. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor's presence became a more frequent fixture in our interactions. While she was always polite, I sensed a certain protectiveness towards Alistair, a subtle disapproval of my unconventional ways and the growing closeness between us. I couldn't blame her. From her perspective, I was an enigmatic newcomer with strange ideas who had seemingly captivated her dear friend. Despite Eleanor's watchful eye, Alistair and I found ways to steal moments together, our connection deepening with each stolen glance and whispered word. The weight of the impending October date hung over me, a constant reminder of the tragedy that loomed. I knew I had to act soon, to make him truly understand the danger he was in. October arrived, bringing with it a chill in the air and a growing sense of dread in my heart. The 27th was fast approaching, the day my dreams had foretold Alistair's demise. My attempts to subtly dissuade him from being at the docks that day had been met with polite assurances but no real change in his plans. He remained committed to overseeing the final stages of the warehouse construction. Desperation began to set in. I knew I had to be more direct, even if it meant risking his disbelief or even ridicule. I arranged to meet Alistair in the quiet solitude of the British Museum, hoping the gravity of the setting might lend weight to my words. Alistair, I began, my voice trembling slightly as we stood before a towering Egyptian obelisk, a silent testament to the passage of time. I need to speak to you plainly about my premonition. He turned to me, his expression a mixture of concern and gentle amusement. Myra, we have discussed this. I appreciate your worry, but I assure you. No, you don't understand, I interrupted, my voice rising slightly. This isn't just a vague feeling. I have seen it, Alistair. In my dreams. The scaffolding. It collapses. You are there. It's fatal. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and stark. Alistair's amusement faded, replaced by a look of serious concern. Myra, are you all right? You seem deeply distressed. I am distressed, I exclaimed, my voice echoing slightly in the vast hall. Because I know what's going to happen. It's not just a bad dream, Alistair. It's real. It feels real. I've seen the details. The way the light falls that afternoon, the sound of the gulls, even the conversation you're having with the foreman just moments before. I trailed off, overwhelmed by the vividness of the memory. He took my hands in his touch surprisingly firm. Myra, I believe you are experiencing something troubling. Perhaps these dreams are a manifestation of anxiety. The construction is a demanding project. No, I insisted, pulling my hands away. You have to believe me, Alistair. Please. Don't go to the docks on the 27th. Stay away. Just for that one day. Please. My voice broke, tears welling in my eyes. Alistair looked at me. His expression a complex mix of concern, confusion, and something akin to a flicker of doubt. Myra, he said softly, I don't know what to say. I cannot simply abandon my responsibilities based on a dream, however vivid it may be. But what if it's not just a dream? I pleaded. What if it's a warning? Wouldn't you rather be safe than sorry? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Myra, I appreciate your concern. Truly I do. But I have a duty to my clients, to my workers. I cannot simply disappear on a crucial day. Then let me come with you, I blurted out, the words escaping before I could fully consider them. Let me be there. Perhaps my presence can somehow change things. Alistair looked at me as if I had suggested flying to the moon. Myra, the docks are no place for a lady. It's a busy, often dangerous environment. But if I know what's going to happen, I argued desperately, Maybe I can prevent it. Please, Alistair. My heart tells me this is important. More important than you can possibly imagine. He studied my face, his gaze searching, trying to decipher the raw emotion in my eyes. The skepticism was still there, but I also saw a hint of uncertainty, a crack in his rational facade. Let me think about it, Myra, he finally said, his voice low. I need time to process what you've told me. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a definitive no either. It was a sliver of hope in the encroaching darkness of fate. The 27th was just days away, and I knew I had to convince him, one way or another, to heed my desperate warning. The weight of his future, our future, rested heavily on my shoulders. The days leading up to the 27th of October were fraught with a suffocating tension. Alistair remained polite but somewhat distant, clearly wrestling with my dire warnings. He hadn't outright dismissed them, but neither had he agreed to my desperate plea to stay away from the docks or allow me to accompany him. Eleanor, sensing the strain between us, became an even more constant presence by his side. Her polite smiles directed at me, holding a distinct undercurrent of suspicion. The Blackwood household was abuzz with preparations for a grand autumn ball scheduled for the evening of the 26th, the very eve of the day I dreaded. The contrast between the festive atmosphere and the gnawing anxiety in my stomach was almost unbearable. I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at every unexpected sound, the vivid images of my dreams playing on repeat in my mind. During a quiet moment in the library, I found Alistair poring over architectural blueprints, his brow furrowed in concentration. I hesitated, knowing I risked further alienating him, but I couldn't remain silent. Alistair, I began softly, the day after tomorrow. He looked up, a weary expression in his eyes. Myra, we have spoken of this. But have you truly considered what I said? I pressed, stepping closer. The details I described, they weren't just random imaginings. I saw the broken scaffolding, the position of the sun, the distinctive blue scarf one of the workers was wearing. My voice cracked slightly. Please, Alistair. Just for one day. Stay away from the docks. He sighed, setting down his papers. Myra, I appreciate your concern, but I cannot simply shirk my responsibilities based on a feeling. The warehouse is nearing completion, and my presence is required for the final inspections. But your life is more important than a building. I exclaimed, my voice laced with desperation. Can't someone else oversee the final inspections for a single day? It is not that simple, he explained, his tone patient but firm. I am the lead architect. My decisions are crucial at this stage. Tears welled in my eyes. Then please let me be there. If I know what's going to happen, maybe I can warn you in time. Maybe I can make a difference. He looked at me, his gaze filled with a mixture of pity and exasperation. Myra, you are asking me to believe in something extraordinary. Something that defies all logic and reason. But haven't you found our connection extraordinary? I countered, my voice trembling. Haven't you felt the pull between us, despite the circumstances? Isn't it possible that this warning is part of that same inexplicable connection? He remained silent for a long moment, his gaze searching mine. I could see the internal conflict raging within him. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to believe, Myra. But your distress, it is genuine. It troubles me. Then please, Alistair, I pleaded, taking his hands in mine. Trust me. Just this once. Stay away from the docks on the 27th. Or if you must go, let me be there with you. He looked down at our intertwined hands, his expression unreadable. I will consider it, Myra. I promise. It wasn't the reassurance I desperately craved, but it was a glimmer of hope. As the evening of the ball arrived, the sounds of music and laughter echoed through the mansion, a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. I moved through the crowded rooms like a ghost, my smile forced, my mind consumed by the impending day. I knew that whatever Alistair decided, I had to be at the East London docks on the 27th. His life depended on it. The morning of October 27th dawned grey and overcast, mirroring the heavy feeling in my chest. I had barely slept, tossing and turning with anxiety. I had seen Alistair briefly at breakfast, but he had been reserved, offering only a polite nod. I had no idea what he had decided. Determined to take matters into my own hands, I slipped out of the Blackwood estate early, the borrowed dress feeling like a flimsy disguise against the cold reality of my mission. I made my way towards the East London docks, the journey feeling both agonizingly slow and terrifyingly fast. The docks were already bustling with activity when I arrived, a chaotic scene of loading cranes, shouting workers, and the screech of gulls. I scanned the area frantically, searching for Alistair. And then I saw him, standing near a partially erected warehouse, talking to a man in a foreman's hat. My heart lurched. He had come. I pushed my way through the throng of people, my modern sensibilities clashing with the slower pace of the Victorian workers. Alistair! I called out, my voice barely audible above the din. He turned, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw me. Myra! What are you doing here? I had to come, I said breathlessly, reaching his side. I told you, the scaffolding. I gestured towards a section of the structure that looked precariously high. Please, Alistair, stay away from there. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of exasperation and something else. A flicker of understanding? Myra, you can't be serious. You shouldn't be here. It's dangerous. But it's more dangerous for you to be there. I insisted, grabbing his arm. Please just trust me. Come away from the scaffolding. Just then, Clara Bellwether, a gossipy maid from the Blackwood estate who had a penchant for being everywhere at once, bustled past, her eyes widening in surprise as she spotted us. Miss Sterling. Mr. Finch. What a scandalous rendezvous, she exclaimed, her voice carrying over the noise. Alistair sighed, a hint of annoyance crossing his features. Clara, this is hardly the time. But Clara, ever the busybody, was already hurrying off to undoubtedly spread the news of our secret meeting. The unexpected distraction, however, had shifted Alistair's attention away from the immediate area around the scaffolding. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the air. The ground seemed to tremble, and a section of the very scaffolding I had been pointing to groaned ominously. Workers cried out in alarm as the structure began to buckle and sway. Alistair's eyes widened in horror as he instinctively took a step back, pulling me with him. The scaffolding crashed down with a deafening roar, sending splinters of wood and metal flying. The area where Alistair had been standing just moments before was now a mangled heap of debris. A stunned silence fell over the docks, broken only by the cries of injured workers. Alistair stared at the wreckage, his face pale. He turned to me, his eyes filled with disbelief and a dawning understanding. Myra, he whispered, his voice hoarse. You see, I said, my own voice trembling. I told you. In the ensuing chaos, as workers rushed to aid the injured, Alistair held my gaze, his hand gripping mine tightly. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. The impossible had happened, just as I had foreseen. Over the next few hours, amidst the confusion and the investigation into the scaffolding collapse, Alistair stayed close to my side. He was quiet, clearly shaken by the near disaster and the undeniable accuracy of my premonition. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the docks, Alistair finally spoke, his voice low and filled with a newfound wonder. Myra, he said, his grip on my hand tightening, I don't understand how, but you saved my life. I looked at him, tears of relief and exhaustion welling in my eyes. I told you, Alistair. Some connections transcend time. In that moment, standing amidst the wreckage and the fading light, our bond deepened, forged in the face of destiny defied. The future remained uncertain, our journey through time and love still unfolding. But one thing was clear. We had faced the shadow of fate, and together, we had stepped into a new tomorrow. Side Story 1. Alistair's Reckoning. The days following the scaffolding collapse were a blur for Alistair. The near-death experience had shaken him to his core, but it was Myra's impossible knowledge that truly occupied his thoughts. He found himself replaying their conversations, her earnest pleas, the specific details she had recounted. Details she couldn't possibly have known through conventional means. One quiet evening, after ensuring the injured workers were being cared for and the investigation into the structural failure had begun, Alistair found Myra in the Blackwood's conservatory, surrounded by the fragrant blooms. The soft glow of the gaslight illuminated her worried expression. Myra, he began, his voice low, I have been contemplating everything you told me. She looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. And he took a deep breath. The details, the blue scarf, the conversation with Mr. Davies about the faulty supports. You couldn't have known those things. He paused, searching for the right words. It defies all logic, all reason yet. I cannot deny what I witnessed. You saved my life, Myra. And you knew what was going to happen. Tears welled in her eyes. So, you believe me? He stepped closer, reaching out to gently cup her cheek. I don't understand it. Not in the slightest. But yes, Myra. I believe you. You spoke of connections that transcend time. Is that what this is? Myra nodded, her voice thick with emotion. I came from the future, Alistair. Over 100 years from now. I saw you in my dreams, your life ending in that very accident. I couldn't let it happen. Alistair stared at her, his mind reeling. The future. A concept so vast, so unimaginable. The future. What is it like? Myra offered a small, sad smile. It's different. Full of wonders you can't even conceive of, but also its own set of challenges. But that's not important now. What matters is that I'm here, and you're safe. Alistair took her hand, his grip firm. You risked everything to come here? To save me. You were important to me, even in my dreams, she confessed, her cheeks flushing slightly. I couldn't bear the thought of you, of that loss. A profound sense of gratitude washed over Alistair, mingled with a burgeoning wonder at the woman who stood before him. She had crossed the boundaries of time itself for him. Myra, he said, his voice filled with emotion, I don't know how to thank you. Just believe me, she whispered. And let's be careful. If I could come back, perhaps other things could change too. We need to be mindful of the future. In that moment, under the soft glow of the conservatory, their connection deepened in a way neither of them could have foreseen. The impossible had become their reality, a shared secret that bound them together in a world that suddenly felt both more wondrous and more precarious. Side Story 2. The Locket's Legacy. The antique silver locket, the unassuming object that had been the catalyst for Myra's journey, held a history far deeper than she could have initially imagined. After confiding in Alistair about her origins, she showed him the locket, explaining its strange connection to his photograph. Alistair examined it with a keen interest, his architect's eye noting the intricate engravings. This is quite old, he mused, turning it over in his hands. The style suggests, perhaps the early part of the century. It doesn't look familiar though. Intrigued, they began to investigate the locket's origins. Myra recounted her grandmother's vague stories of it being a family heirloom, passed down through generations. Alistair, with his access to historical records and his keen interest in local history, began to delve into old family archives and antique shops. Their search led them to a dusty ledger in a forgotten corner of a historical society. Within its faded pages, they found mention of a woman named Alara Ainsworth, a distant relative of Eleanor, who had been known for her fascination with unusual sciences and her correspondence with individuals exploring early theories of electromagnetism. An entry detailed a peculiar silver locket she had commissioned, described with engravings remarkably similar to the one Myra possessed. Further research revealed that Alara had been deeply in love with a man named Thomas Ashton, the great-grandfather of the very Dr. Ashton who had inadvertently facilitated Myra's introduction to Alistair. Their love story was a tragic one, with Thomas dying unexpectedly at a young age. The ledger hinted that Alara had been searching for ways to bridge the distance created by his death, exploring unconventional ideas about connection and resonance. One particularly intriguing passage spoke of Alara's belief that strong emotional bonds could leave an imprint on objects, creating a form of echo across time. She had apparently imbued the locket with her grief and her enduring love for Thomas, hoping to somehow maintain a connection beyond the veil of death. Alistair and Myra exchanged a look of understanding. Could the locket be more than just a random antique? Could Alara's intense emotions, her longing, have somehow created a conduit across the centuries, drawn to a similar depth of feeling between Myra and Alistair? The discovery didn't fully explain the mechanics of Myra's time travel, but it offered a poignant insight into the locket's significance. It was a tangible link to a past love, a testament to the enduring power of the human heart, and perhaps, the very key that had unlocked Myra's journey to Alistair. The locket was no longer just an heirloom. It was a symbol of love's resilience, a whisper from the past that had shaped their present. Side Story 3. Alistair's Reflections, Epilogue. Years passed after the near-fatal accident at the docks. Alistair sat in his study, the warm glow of the fireplace casting dancing shadows on the walls lined with books and architectural drawings. He was older now, his hair flecked with gray, but his eyes still held the thoughtful intensity that Myra had first been drawn to. He often found himself gazing at a small, silver locket that rested on his desk, a constant reminder of the extraordinary woman who had stepped out of time and into his life. Myra. Her presence had irrevocably altered his world, not just by saving his life, but by opening his mind to possibilities he had never conceived. He remembered the initial disbelief, the struggle to reconcile her fantastical claims with his rational understanding of the world. But the undeniable evidence of her premonition, coupled with the profound connection he felt with her, had forced him to accept the impossible. Their life together in Victorian London had been a unique tapestry woven with love, understanding, and the constant awareness of the temporal divide. Myra, with her knowledge of the future, had navigated their world with a blend of caution and quiet wisdom. She had shared glimpses of the wonders to come, the advancements in science and technology that would reshape society, always careful not to reveal too much and risk altering the delicate fabric of time. He cherished their shared moments, the quiet evenings spent reading by the fire, their discussions about art and philosophy, the simple joy of holding her hand as they walked through the London parks. Their love had blossomed amidst the constraints of the Victorian era, a testament to the enduring power of the human heart to transcend any boundary, even time itself. Yet, there was always a bittersweet undercurrent to their happiness. Alistair often wondered about Myra's world, the life she had left behind. He knew she missed her family, her friends, the familiar comforts of her time. He carried a quiet regret that he could never fully step into her past, never truly understand the world that had shaped her. Sometimes, in the quiet solitude of his study, he would take out the locket, tracing its intricate engravings. He knew its history now, the story of Alara and Thomas, a love that had also been touched by loss and a yearning for connection beyond the ordinary. He understood Alara's desire, the deep-seated human need to bridge the distances that separate us, whether those distances are measured in miles or in centuries. He would think of the day they met, the unexpected arrival of this remarkable woman who had known him in a way no one else ever had. He would remember her earnest eyes, her unwavering conviction, the sheer audacity of her journey. And he would feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the love that had defied the very laws of time, a love that had given him a second chance at life and a future he could never have imagined. His life with Myra was a constant reminder that some connections are destined, woven into the very fabric of existence, waiting for the right moment to unravel across the currents of yesterday and today. And so, the incredible story of my ancestor, Myra, and her love for Alistair concludes. Imagine, a love that spanned centuries, all because of this very locket. It makes you wonder about the hidden histories within our own families, doesn't it? The secrets and dramas that echo through the generations. I've carefully transcribed the latest insights from the old journals into my own, adding my own notes and observations, of course. It's vital to keep these stories alive. Now, as I hold this locket, a tangible piece of their extraordinary romance, my mind can't help but wander to the present day. Whose story will capture my attention next? Perhaps my eccentric Aunt Mildred, who insists she's receiving messages from her prize-winning poodle. Or maybe my neighbor, young Oliver, whose sudden inheritance has attracted a rather colorful cast of new acquaintances. And what about the ongoing saga at the local bakery? The baker's apprentice seems to be embroiled in a clandestine romance with the florist's daughter. Yes, that has all the hallmarks of a classic drama. The threads of life are constantly weaving new and fascinating patterns, and Yukio, with this locket as my inspiration, will be ready to record every thrilling twist and turn. The legacy continues. Thanks for hanging out. Hope you had as much fun listening as I did sharing this story. Because wow, that was a ride. If your jaw is still on the floor, don't worry, I'll help you pick it up next time. If you enjoyed the chaos, go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe. Because trust me, there's always more where that came from.